here we go. This is Marty Wilson speaking. It's January 14th, 2025. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association in Stroudsburg with Glen Lippincott. Also in the room with us is Tanya. Glen, we're here to talk about your Vietnam service and how that's impacted your life since leaving Vietnam. So why don't we start with where and when you were born?
I was born in Easton Hospital in 1950, February 11th in 1950. For the first, we lived down in Northampton County for the first few years of my life, and then finally we moved up to the family farm to live with my grandparents in Scioto. And so I'm about as homeboy as you get, in Monroe County.
Yeah. So Stroudsburg High School?
Stroudsburg High School, graduated in 1968, and I got accepted at Penn State University. I went there. I had nobody really to guide me at all, and I applied for student loan. I didn't apply for near enough money, being kind of frugal and knowing I'm going to have to pay this back, And so what happened is I ran out of money in the would have been 1970. I went off and I got a job, and I was working double shifts anywhere. I was just socking money away to be able to go back to school. And so the draft came around in 1970 in the beginning of the year, and my number was, I always thought it was 151, but it was 150. I looked it up and checked. It was number 150. Where I was working was over in Collins and Aikman over in Penargil, and they offered me a promotion, and I turned them down out of good conscience. It was bad, not bad for me, but good conscience. I said I can't accept that because I said the draft number is coming real close, and I'm 150. So I said it'll probably by summer I'll be drafted. And I was already had gone through the physical up at Wilkes-Barre. I reported to the selective service, which was in the courthouse, the upstairs of the courthouse, or the post office, the second floor of the post office, and that's where I was inducted.
This was 71?
This would have been 1970, I'm sorry.
70.
Yeah.
What did you know about Vietnam before that? I mean, at that point, it was in the news. People knew about Vietnam.
Yeah, I knew where it was. I went and had to look it up, like most people did, to figure where we were at. And I knew that it was an unpopular war. That was for sure. And when I was drafted, I know people came, my friends, and said to me, what are you going to do? I said, well, what do you mean? What am I going to do? I'm going to go. And they said, well, you could go to Canada. And I was like, no, I'm not wired that way. Nope. My family has always served. It's been a generational business, I guess. We've whenever the call has been up, but I've had a grandfather that served with Pancho Villa, chasing Pancho Villa down the Mexican border war, where McKinley actually authorized the United States Army to go into Mexico to chase him down. So he was part of that operation. He got out, did a short stint in the Navy, and then he ended up, when World War I rolled around, and he had a great deal of regard for Pershing, it was Colonel Pershing in the incursion there in the Mexican War, but so he had a great deal of admiration of serving under Pershing, and he and his two brothers enlisted for World War I, and my dad came up for the draft, then he volunteered to be a reservist, and so he, in World War II, as a medic, my uncle John served from down in Easton. He served in the Pacific in World War II, and the 25th Division. So I had my Uncle Charlie served in Korea, my mom's side, so I've had, service was not that foreign to me. It kind of was not, my life plan was to get my education, and then what will be, but it didn't kind of work out that way, so.
By 1970, there was pretty strong anti-war.
Very much so. Yeah.
How did that impact you personally? I mean, did you ignore it? Did you come down on one side or the other? Or?
I think we were. I be honest, I wasn't focused on it that much because I was focused on my college education. You know, so when that became a non-issue, I thought, well, whatever I'm called to do, my country called me to do, that's what I'm going to do. But I did have friends that were urging me to go to Canada if I didn't believe in it, and I thought, well, I believe that the United States was trying to help a fledgling democracy prevail, and also that Eisenhower's theory about the domino theory, that if one fell to communism, then all of Southeast Asia would fall. You know? So I believed in that doctrine, and he was probably correct. You know, and I was profoundly affected by the fact Nikita Khrushchev gets up there at the UN and says, "We will bury you," and that was, you know, like, you know, communism was a real threat, and we were trying to keep the world safe from communist rule. So I reconciled myself with that.
Okay, so you were drafted.
Yep.
This is the summer of 70?
In June 7th, I believe, of 1970, I was drafted.
How was boot? This is the Army.
Army, U.S. Army boot camp. Went down through my Fort Dix, New Jersey, and home of the ultimate weapon, the infantry soldier. And I went through that, and as I was nearing the end of at the end of my training and basic training, I had people on the 1 mile run. I had drill sergeants kind of, you know, other than my own, hollering at me and like, you know, pick it up, don't like the Lippincott. It was like, what are they so interested in my performance? But why am I, you know, I didn't understand. And I was never a distance runner. I was always a sprinter. So I was trying to, you know, to pace myself. And when I knew it was on my last lap of the mile, then I ran, I poured it on. Just simply didn't have the experience. And at the end of boot camp, anyway, it was kind of realized why they were kind of urging me to excel, as we had like 3 days left of basic training, and we were kind of lounging outside the barracks, and you know, the drill instructor comes down, drills out in Rivera. It was E6. That was a short Puerto Rican, and he said, you know, fall in. So we all fell in. He said, where the hell is Private Lippincott? I'm like, oh, I got this far and I ain't getting in trouble, man. Front and center. So I ran. I was in the last rank back. I ran all the way out to the front, and I said, you know, Private Lippincott reporting, sir, as drill sergeant. And he had to stand on his tiptoes, you know, to look into my eyes, you know, with the DI hat bumping into your forehead, you know. And he said, Lippincott, he said, do you know? He said that you placed, he said, in your proficiency tests, he said, you placed first in this whole company. He said, you know, you placed third in the whole damn battalion. And the cycle, you know, going through all the training. And I said, no, drill sergeant, no, drill sergeant. He said, I just want to know what the hell you look like. Now fall back in. You know, that was it. So it was, and I've got low five on the guys in my squad, or go low five on me all the way around. But I had no idea that I was that proficient until he called me out.
So where was boot camp at?
In Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Fort Dix. So at the end of boot camp, did you know you were going to Vietnam? I mean, was that always preordained sort of?
No. Well, we didn't get any orders for Vietnam at that time. We got orders for infantry. You know, they're handing out the orders, the infantry, and it was most of us went all out to Fort Lewis, Washington, for advanced individual training for infantry. There was a noteworthy. There was one fellow that I went through, was from here in East Stroudsburg, and he couldn't hit anything with a rifle. We had to kind of cheat a little bit to help shoot some of his targets in order to get him through. And the cadre must have been very well understanding that. So it's come down through, and it says, and it was armor. It was infantry armor, and then some of it was comment was maybe, well, maybe you could hit something with a tank, with a tank round. So they kind of knew, but we got him through it. But that's the way a team worked, we put a few rounds in our target and then put a few rounds in his target, so he aced it. So, but then it was we graduated on a Saturday. I got to see my wife. I got married to she was from Pleasant Valley, but a high school sweetheart, if you will. I got married. I wasn't too sure it was a good thing to do, but so I got married before I was inducted, and so I got to see my wife and my parents for about 3 hours on a Saturday, and by Sunday, and we couldn't leave the post. We had to stay there, and by Sunday morning, we were on a 707, which was the biggest jet at the time, a Boeing 707, and we flew out to made multiple stops out to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for artillery engineers at Fort Leonard Wood, and then flew out to my first jet plane ride, and it was out to Fort Lewis, Washington, and Seattle, Tacoma came in there, and we were in the old we were in new barracks down at Fort Lewis. They were 4-story brick buildings. We were in the old World War II barracks out at Fort Lewis, Washington, of the old definitely World War II and Korea trained in that same facility and that lived in those same barracks, and it went well out there. I also, because I was my proficiency, I came out of basic training as an E2, so I got my mosquito wings. In other words, I got a promotion because accelerated rank program. So I excelled at AIT, and I came out of there as a PFC, a private first class. So normally you'd come out as an E2, and I was an E3.
So at this point, are you being trained specifically? I mean, I don't know how it works. Are guys trained to be machine gunners, or guys trained to be? How does that work?
Well, yeah, infantry AIT. You train on everything. All small weapons. The M16 rifle, the M60 machine gun, how to actually, they had a village there that that was set up with people that were actors, basically, and they're wearing coolie hats, braided hats, and we swept through a village like you were going to really do it in Vietnam, and it was pretty. They trained us in quick fire techniques, was to point and shoot, and not specifically bear and a dead aim. In other words, you extend. If you point something, you take this hand, and if I'm going to point at her, I know that's where it's going to go. Because most at that time they had learned most close quarter combat in Vietnam was 75 feet. So we were close to the enemy most of the time, and so and the statistics proved out the ones who shot first could draw a bead and fire first were the ones who survived the combat.
Wasn't there some controversy with that rifle, the M16?
Yeah, they had. Well, we learned from the enemy as well, because they had the AK-47, which is the preferred weapon of our adversaries, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese regulars. That had a chrome bore and a chrome chamber, chrome plated, and in the jungle environment, the first M16s that came out, they were not. They were made too tight a tolerance, and they didn't have that chrome plating, so in a jungle environment it was corrosive and wet and dirty, and so it was a chore keeping them clean. But so the later ones, the ones I trained with anyway, were the upgraded versions, and I only ever can remember one malfunction on a double feed one time in all the rounds that we put downrange. So they had straightened it out pretty well by then. Yeah.
All right. So when do you figure out you're going, or did they tell you you're going to Vietnam, or do you sort of figure out from the training, or?
You get it's the same thing when you get your orders. You stand around and call your name out, and they hand you your orders, and they or call you out. And I think everybody who was in that whole training company out there was Vietnam, 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 and just and so we were trained for it. And I'm grateful to the United States Army because we had veterans that came back from over there that made the training very real, and we knew what to expect. On the night before I left for Vietnam in the mess hall, we were sitting around and having some coffee, I think, and we were lagging a little bit, and a couple of the guys were like, "Oh man," I said, "Well, aren't you afraid about where we're going?" I was like, "No," and they're like, "Well, what to expect? What do you think?" And I said, "What's your MOS, which is your military occupational specialty?" Mine was 11 Bravo, but numerically 11 Bravo 40, and the guy was like, "Well, I'm a generator repairman." So I don't know what the other was, a wheel mechanic. Those guys, had never, they trained them what to do, but they didn't train them where they were going to go. Like the infantry, they trained us as if that's where we're going. I mean, some got slipped off that went to Germany or Korea at that time, but most of us knew where we were going, and we were trained for that.
When you got your orders to go to Vietnam, did it say where in Vietnam, or it just said going to Vietnam?
Just said, report to Cam Ranh Bay. I do remember that when sitting there with that conversation, we sat there, and one of the dining hall stewards came out and said something. "You guys are going to have to pack up and go." And one of the other guys said, "Easy, man." He said, "They're going to Nam, so let them have their second cup of coffee. Leave them be." So we were able to sit there when everybody else was gone and have a cup of coffee.
So how long after you got your orders did you get on the plane to go across the?
We got the orders were for 30 days. I'm saying that occurred when we went back to Fort Lewis. So we graduated from advanced infantry training, 30 days, and then we were told you got 30 days delay en route, put your life in order, go back home, put your life in order, and be back here, report back here in a month. So I had 30 days. I went home, flew into Philadelphia, put my life in order, I guess you would say, and then just reported back over there. And that's when I had that conversation with the scared generator repair guy.
So were you in your uniform when you're traveling on those commercial planes?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we still were doing that. Yeah.
Did you ever run into any anti-war?
No, can't say as I did. I did a really cute first lieutenant in the Air Force was coming back from Texas, and she was chatting me up, and she wanted. So I thought that was. Do you have anybody waiting for you back in Philadelphia? My parents live up in Drexel Hill, and you could stay the night there. And like, thank you, ma'am, but I got a wife that's waiting for me. And so that was it. So that was a good thing, I guess. So.
How'd your wife and your parents take the news you're going to Vietnam?
My mom was of course very, very worried, and I told her, I said, "Mom," I said, the old expression, "Only the good die young." I said, "I'm going to live to be a ripe old age." So that was my solace, the way to console her, I guess. Yeah.
So all right. So then, how do you fly to Vietnam? Right?
So we flew from Fort Lewis to Seattle, Tacoma. We flew up on a commercial flight to Alaska to Anchorage, and where we landed to refuel, they had a hydraulic leak, so we had to delay en route there. Of course, like all good GIs, we swarmed the bar, and we had a businessman up there that said, I don't know, threw $1,000 on the bar and says, "Let them drink till it's gone," So yeah, so that was kind of nice, So we then headed out of there, and we flew into Cam Ranh Bay, which is the replacement depot for all of Vietnam. So you centralized. You went to Cam Ranh Bay, and spent a couple of days there until I got orders cut for the AmeriCal division up north, up in I Corps, and the Vietnam was divided to war zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 was all the way up north from the DMZ down to where the Central Highlands was, and that was two corps there, they call it. So the Roman numeral I, we was affectionately referred to as I Corps, and so that's why I was assigned to the Marical Division. Caught an Army 2-engine transport plane, which was a Caribou, and took that plane up to Chu Lai, where the Marical Division was headquartered, and I sat there for it was probably the longest, seemed like it was the longest week or so in my whole life. We went through in-country orientation there as a new recruit.
When you go to Cam Ranh Bay, were you there hours, days?
Couple days, I think 3 days, something. That was duty of cleaning out, which was kind of neat because I was there cleaning out some of the barracks, the transient barracks, where people coming out of there and going home. We had to go and we had to go clean these things out, and I got a brand new field jacket which I sent home. I probably as a man, I said that's pristine, So I sent one home, and so just a couple days there, some BS duty, just to make work or a little bit. Head up to the replacement depot, and
that's you said in country training or something.
Yeah, we received a week of in country training at Marical, and they were you can any of the fish if you can eat any of the fish that are here, they're safe, and anywhere different about what to expect in the field. Some was pretty funny. There was they told about the wildlife and a couple things that were very humorous about the whole thing. But it did strike me though that when I got there was a big sand dune kind of came off the ocean and where this replacement depot was, and we got talking, and they said the mountains out to the west, and they said that's Indian country, and I'm thinking, you kidding me? We've been here how many years now? Like 8 years, and we only owned a mile and a half of the beach up to those mountains was all it was under government control. And I thought, we're not making very good progress, is my first thoughts. That was I remember that.
You just said something about fish.
Yeah. Well, in other words, if you were in a situation where you had to survive or whatever, the fish was an easy fishing was an easy way to get some food. Gotcha. As I recall, but we just learned the basics of there. We already knew what our job was, so it was like just in country orientation. Colonel came out and gave us pep talk, and the adjutant, and then we were assigned to our units one by one till the orders came down or cut. So I was assigned to the 3rd and 21st Infantry, and had a guy in a Jeep come pick me up, and I don't know whether he was trying to rattle me or what, but well, I guess he was a little bit crazy, I guess you would say, because they would pick me up in a Jeep, and we didn't go on the traditional roads. We were out going across these sand dunes and stuff, and we were flying all over the place. And I'm like, well, that ain't nothing to me. I mean, I've ridden the back country here in Monroe County. It didn't bother me, and whether he was trying to rattle me or not. But anyway, then I got into our company area, and the sergeant, I said, what's the deal with him? And he said, well, he said, yeah, we pulled him out of the field because they said he, I guess, was walking point, and he had the point man always walked with the head down watching the trail for tripwires or mines, and the second man, you saw his point and slack, and the slack man watched out ahead of you like this, and anyway, but supposedly they had a spider hole, and it was dug in position with a pop, like a hatch that pops open, and it goes like this, and a VC of Viet Cong, Victor Charles is our phonetic alphabet we use, But anyway, he popped up in front of this guy, and he basically emptied a magazine, a AK, right at point blank range, and it never hit him. But all he kept doing, when he saw him, he reached up to grab the muzzle of the weapon, and he kept doing this, and the guy kept trying to avoid him, and he emptied the whole 30-round magazine at him. And as soon as the clip was out, the slack man shot him with one round and killed the guy. But he had that incident, that traumatic experience, had kind of rattled him to the point where they just took him out of the field and said, "We're going to make a Jeep driver back here in the rear." So that was my first experience of seeing somebody who had experienced extreme trauma in combat.
So how long was this Jeep ride?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it was 10 minutes, I would say, something like it. It was a little long.
But it's still within that 1.5 miles that you said that the U.S. controlled at that point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the division. Yeah.
I'm trying to picture this. Was it sandy, or were you in the jungle? What was
it? It was sand. You had you had the South China Sea. You had some flat area. Then you had a berm, a big dune. And then it kind of came down a little bit on the east side, and then it was flat all the way across where the airstrip was, and all the way out to the mountains. They had that Chu Lai was built, and I worked with a Navy Seabee who built that airstrip there. They needed another place for the F-4 Phantoms to land other than Da Nang, and they realized that they had no good place to put wheels down, so they had a reinforced concrete airstrip that they built at Chu Lai. It was originally a Marine base, and when General Westmoreland moved the troops up north toward the border, toward the DMZ, Maricao was put in there because they said the United States Army is better equipped to win the hearts and minds of the people, not the Marine Corps.
Why?
Well, Marine Corps, they're taught to kill. They like to go in and clean things out, and that's not where you want to be able to deal, with the people.
So it was a 10-minute ride to the base that you're stationed.
That was my regimental and battalion base. Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're protecting the airfield, I assume, right?
We weren't. The guys would only. There were troops out there. But the only thing they had was a ready reactionary force that if they did get hit one night with rockets, and then they mounted up deuce and haps, and everybody went in and drew weapons. We didn't carry weapons in the rear area there at that time, which is, I guess surprised us a little bit. So you had no weapon, so they were reactionary force only. If the base got hit, they would take troops out to wherever was needed.
How many people are at this base that you're? This is the base you're going to be at now for.
Yeah, well, it's our home base. Let's put it that way. So the Maricao was the largest division, and I would have to get back to you the exact number of troops. It was huge. It would not have worked in World War II. It would have been too big to move around to maneuver. You had too many people, too many support organizations. So it was boom on the coast, set there. I got assigned then when the 3rd to 21st, our operational area was north of there, and we went up to the brigade. The 196th Maricao Division was so large, and that it was authorized a pocket patch, and I was kind of delayed. I was looking for my other uniform. I was going to bring that along, but for the 11th Light Infantry Brigade, the 198th and the 196th, and we were the farthest north for the Maricao Division, and we butted against RAO, or Area of Operations, butted against where the Marines operated out of Da Nang at that time, and they had Marines guarding that air base up there, and so I was assigned to the 196th Light Infantry, and it was a LZ Hawk Hill north of Tam Key, which is, if you go up and think about the coast as a ladder, I'll do it this way. You had Cameron Bay, you fly up, and you've got Chu Lai, you fly up, and then you have Tam Key, and a little above that you have where we were, and then all the way up. Then you have Da Nang, and our primary area of operation was a big rice bowl there. That was a rice growing region. That was a huge V-shaped area of rice paddies that ran almost over to the Laotian border, to where Hep Duck was, and Hep Duck was Indian country. That was a bad time when you had to go out there.
What was your job? What did you do?
Well, we patrolled primarily. Interestingly enough, today, like I said, it triggered me a little bit, but we were search and destroy missions. So we went up to LZ Center, where I worked off of. The 3rd and 21st Infantry worked off of LZ Landing Zone Center. So LZ Center is where we operate off, and we would go out 2 weeks out patrolling, and then we would come back onto the fire base for 3 days, and we would sleep in the bunkers that were there and guard the LZ, and then we would go back out in the field in another. So a lot of times I spent the majority of the time that I was there. I didn't spend any hard cover over my head. It was monsoon season at the boot, so
you're sleeping out in
the open. We'd rig up a poncho. Was a little bit of the jungle was fairly thick, and we would hang the neck of the poncho, if you can imagine a big square, with the neck, the poncho. We'd bend a tree down and tie bootlaces. We had to ask for extra bootlaces, and we'd tie that as a string to the center, and then we would put all 4 corners out, and then we would they were issued an air mattress but in an environment like that, where everything there's prickers and stickers, and then the air mattresses didn't last very long. So you basically had an air mattress, gray air mattress with a ground cloth, and that's how we slept. So most of our time was spent in the 4.5 months I was there was not undercover.
When you're on these patrols, how many men are with you?
We operated on a platoon, so it would be we had not traditionally like you would. We were trained and organized like for World War II, whatever. Normally you have a platoon that has 4 units in it. I'm struggling here for a minute, but we operated as a squad. We had 2 fire teams, and we had our CP. We had a radio operator and a platoon sergeant, and we had a machine gun, we had a radio, and we had 1 grenade launcher, grenadier. Then we had a second that would mirror that exact same thing. So we had two squads, and then we had the CP, or the command position or command post, which was the platoon sergeant, the platoon leader, usually a first or second lieutenant. And then we had the head RTO, or RTO is a term. It's a radio telephone operator, but really what it was there, you're a radio operator. So we were about half size. In other words, we operated about half size as what you would in World War II. You would operate at.
So how many men did roughly? I mean.
Well, yeah. You got me thinking here. I got a picture of my squad in there, and I can tell you how many people were.
20 guys or.
So we had probably 8, 16, 32, 30, maybe 38.
Okay. So here's
if at full complement. There were always somebody that was on R&R or whatever. There was people that were in the field, and they sometimes weren't in the field. So.
Well, yeah, that gets to the question I want to ask you, which is about in Vietnam, the Army. In World War II, guys trained together and they went off to war together and they fought together for the whole time. But you show up and you got 12 months and you're fighting with a guy that's been there for 3 months and he's leaving in 9 months, right? I mean,
there was constant turnover, yeah.
How did that impact?
My squad leader, I was lucky. He was a Mormon, Latter-day Saints, and he was, I believe, from Ohio. With the internet, I've tried to reconnect with him. But John Collison, and he was sort of like a mother hen a little bit, and they used to treat, depending on the culture of every unit was different, and the culture, ours was a little bit more genteel, I think, and we called new guy was called a green seed. There's other, the FNG and and a cherry and other terms were used for those guys, and you kind of didn't get accepted until you kind of proved yourself, and so his squad leader was like, listen to me, do exactly what I tell you, and he said, don't do anything stupid to get yourself or us killed. That was my mission, right, as a new guy,
So how long after you were there did another new guy show up?
I think it was quite a while. It was quite a while, I believe. It maybe a month and a half, 2 months, maybe,
Okay. All right.
perhaps. But the one thing that, and this is, I've written about this for the journal, for the division journal, and it was I ended up as our culture was, whoever we would alternate on squads, who would walk point, and then we would the squad leader would assign somebody to walk point. So one of the veteran guys was assigned to walk point, and then you could choose your slack man, the guy behind you, to back you up. And he says, I'll take the new guy. And I thought, whoa, okay, this is one of, you got one of the guys that are long in the tooth, been in the field, and he's asking me to watch his back. So I recognized what kind of a responsibility that was. And it just so happens, as things worked out, it was monsoon season, pouring rain. That mission, it rained every day for 2 weeks. You were constantly wet. There was no let up. We left, we went down not far from where we were, and we were in Indian country. We were out we had, the rules of engagement were different. You had no fire zones, limited fire zones, and then you had free fire zones. And free fire zones is where we were at. In other words, nobody out there was supposed to be friendly. Although there were caveats to that, because they would push make people that were there that owned that land refugees, and took them to a refugee camp. And as soon as they got a chance, they'd come out and they'd come back to where their farm was. And I, being a farm boy from Scioto, I said, I can surely appreciate that. I understand their feeling. So we were even in a no fire zone, we were very careful about pulling the trigger, on people. And so anyway, we started out, and it was, we came down to a larger, it was a dog bone, if you can imagine looking overhead. It was 2 rice paddy areas, and they were kind of connected, and it was a narrow there, and the trail went down, and you could see it went across that rice paddy to the other side. So he admonished me, when he came, and I don't even know his name. To this day, I cannot remember, because he wasn't there long, and he went home. But he did say that he said, you keep a sweep on both sides, keep watching, scan the area, and keep the interval, which was, you had this, 3 to 5 meters anyway. You got to keep space between us, so if somebody opens up on you, they won't kill a whole bunch of you at one time. So they would so keep the interval. So we went down onto this rice paddy, this trail across, and we're walking it, and I am really scanning. I got my head on a swivel watching. He disappears in front of me. I went, look, and like, where'd he go? Like he went into thin air, And I turned around and looked at Peter Uribe, and he was an 18-year-old who got drafted when he graduated. 2 weeks after he graduated high school in Los Angeles, he was drafted. So I looked back to Peter, and Peter goes, I went, so like he couldn't go up, or he had to have gone down somehow. So I moved forward cautiously, and in the water, I saw a hand coming up like this. And then it went down at an angle. It went down, and I thought, "Oh hell!" I said, "He's in a shell crater, like a 500-pound bomb blows a conical crater under the water. Well, in the water, everything looks even but underneath. So I realized what we had. So I'm like, and this is all nonverbal, just, like, hurry up, get up here. And so I went out and I put my M16 on safe, made sure I had that, and I handed it back to Pete. And I got myself sliding down on the edge of this crater, going down at the cone. And I saw the hand come up, and I was reaching for it, and I said, I can't get to it. So I took a breath, and I stuck my face under the water and was able to grab his hand and pull him up to the surface. And of course, my squad leader, seeing what was going on, he immediately bypassed us, sent men to set up a perimeter on. So we got both sides of this area was now covered with weapons, and it pulled him up there and got him out. And one of the guys came up and grabbed the rucksack, and I helped him, and I got him over to the shore, and we sat there, and he was coughing up water, and he looked at me, and he says, and with all that sincerity, he said, "Thanks, man." He said, "You saved my life." And like we held the bravado, we said, "Don't mean nothing." That was our phrase we used for a lot of things. Don't let it bother me. It's cool. So it don't mean nothing. And I do know that later that my squad leader said at the end of that day, came to me, he said, he gave me a pat on the shoulder. He said, "You did good today." So, but I knew at that point, the rest of that platoon knew that I was somebody you could be counted on.
You had proven yourself.
I had proven myself without firing a shot. My stock in trade, so to speak, in the platoon probably shot up, 40 points. So.
All right. So when you go on these missions,
yeah,
for how long did you say? 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah.
So you're out there. How far do you walk?
Oh God, that's a good question. We would do, depending upon the terrain, there was mountains. Where we were was mountains, and we would do probably 5 to maybe 8 miles a day, depending upon where we were assigned to go to. And like they said, well, you get these, if you're just search and destroy is what we were at. And like I said, part of this I want to bring up is that, which came to me today, is that political correctness was seeping in then. We had a company-size formation on the fire base, and we all stood there, and the colonel says to me, he said, "We are changing our mission. We are no longer doing sweep and search operations, or search and destroy. We are now doing sweep and search. Does anybody have any questions?" And one sergeant said, "Well, excuse me, sir, but what does that mean for us in the field?" He said, "Absolutely nothing. But you are not to talk to any reporters. You're not allowed to write home and say that you're doing search and destroy missions. You don't tell any reporters you're doing search and destroy missions. You are now doing sweep and search." But we didn't do anything whatsoever. When we would set up a booby trap, we used to use a claymore mine, and we would use a clothespin, spring-operated clothespin, and we would wrap wire around each side, and we would take a tripwire and attach it to a plastic blade of a knife. We would bore a hole in it and tie the tripwire to it, and we put it there, and we had a battery, so that and the blasting cap was in the claymore, so that if somebody came by and tripped that wire, made contact, blasting cap throws 300 ball bearings down the trail. So technically, by the Geneva Convention, you're not allowed to set up booby traps. So we called them, now they're called IEDs. Same thing exactly. But so we call them anti-personnel detection device. So it was you could add some of our long range reconnaissance guys had a silencer on their M16s. You can't have a silencer during the Geneva Convention, so we called it a noise suppression device. So it was a game, and so that it's interestingly enough, the subject today of the hearings was about had a lot to do with that, about rules of engagement and about our adherence to the Geneva Convention, and they don't have any restraints whatsoever. Yeah.
So you're walking 8 miles, 8 miles a day. Are you constantly feeling tension, feeling anxious, feeling wondering where the next?
Yeah, because you were, the threats were from enemy combatants. The threats were for booby traps on land, on the ground, or mines. One of the times when I was walking point, I found a tripwire. I saw a tripwire, and I'm like, everybody stopped, and I'm like, back up. So everybody stretched out, and then they spread out, and the squad leader comes up and said, "What do you got?" And I said, "I got a rusty tripwire right here." And so he said, "Okay." So they come up, and I don't know, one of the guys must have had a little bit of we all have explosive training with using dynamite, C4 plastic, and so I stayed there, and the squad leader and one other guy came up, and he was seasoned, and he'd been in the field quite a bit, and then we dug around and probed, and we disconnected the tripwire and that sort of thing. But here it was a 155 millimeter howitzer round that was buried under the trail. So here's like 95 pounds of an artillery shell about that long and whatever, that big around, laying under the trail. And so then what we had to do was we kind of expanded our perimeter a little bit, and we found a berm back there, and then we rigged it with C4 plastic and a blasting cap, and we blew it in place, and we had to back up. But we were close enough that it literally, like you said, it picked you up off the ground. When it exploded, it picked you up off the ground and shook the dust out of your pocket and put you back down again. It was that. So, but we had a slight rise, a berm that was there we could hide behind when we detonated. So that was the kind of stuff that you ran across in the field.
Were there contact with the enemy very often?
Well, definitely during monsoon season. We laughed about it because I said the Americans were the ones stupid enough to go wandering around in the rain, and it was by chance usually that we had pretty good noise discipline, and and the first real firefight I was in was my buddy Joe. He was out in oddly enough, we grew up Scotts, Michigan, and Joe Kaderi, and I grew up in a little village of Scioto. He grew up in a little village of Scotts out in Michigan. And Joe was on point. We came down through, and we smelled the cooking fire, smelled a fire. We found it on the side of a hill. They had this a hooch, we'll say, a grass thatched hut, and we nicknamed Hooch. And Joe was on point, and there was a cluster. There was like 7, I think, in there, but they were all inside out of the rain. So here we are. Here's the GIs come walking up in the rain, and it said Joe called him out and said, "La Day," which means come here. And he saw one guy make a move for it from a hammock. He was hanging in a hammock, and he went for his AK. Well, that it was game on then. And we had come down, and we had positioned ourselves. We were a perfect like L-shaped ambush, and so the crossfire in that hut was pretty amazing. And what I remember about that was that we fired them up, and it was the first time you could see how devastating an M16 round was. It's only a 22 caliber, 223. 5.56 millimeter. but one of the rounds had hit one of those guys in the knee, and it hit him in the knee here. It went down his leg, and you could see the tissue damage in the calf muscle, and it blew out the arch of his foot. And I thought, damn, that was, that's the first time I saw the physical devastation it was capable of. It hit him in the knee, and it followed the bone down to it exited out of his arch. So they were unstable, and that made them pretty lethal. But we did manage to capture they had a North Vietnamese doctor who was very tall, which is surprising. He is being most of the Vietnamese were kind of diminutive, he was very tall, and a nurse, and they had dove in. We saw people dive into the spider hole they had in the back there. It goes in, and they had a something in there, so we had to get them out. So we stood there, and we tossed grenades in to you pull, and we throw two at a time, so you can't. One, you might be able to get a chance of throwing back out. So we backed up to them, we pulled the pins, we threw it in there, boom, it blew, and we kept our Kit Carson scout, who was a Viet Cong who had Chu Hoid, or Open Arms, so the program was called, and he came over to the government side. So he ended up, he told him, he was speaking in Vietnamese, and it really made me wish that I could actually talk to him, but tried to convince him to come out. And so then we were going to throw in another. We got ready to throw a grenade. And they had given me back at base camp, back at Chu Lai, they had given me a baseball grenade, and they said, "Get this out of here. You're going back out the field. We don't want it back here in the rear area. Take it out to the field." So I said, "All right." So we're getting ready to throw a second frag in there. We had already thrown two in. Now we're standing ready to throw it in that and blow the hole. And they come out, and I know that, I mean, the doctor he probably punctured eardrum. He had blood coming out of his ears, and the nurse didn't see. She seemed to be all right, but he gave a ration of crap to our Kit Carson scout, which was a lot smaller toy, but he had to hold him. He's slapping him back and forth like this. Don't sass me, in other words. And he slapped him up. So we thought, oh man, this is pretty good. We got to, if you could keep your area, primarily, but the more I do it to that point was you have your area of operation. If you could keep it free of military weapons or ammunition, food, and or medical supplies, the enemy would never commit a large group of soldiers to your area. And that was primarily what we were doing out there, was just keeping it, So we were out, this was out pretty far. This was like not far from the Laotian border, where you had the enemy coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail over in Laos, and then it would cross into Vietnam. And Hep Duc was one of the big crossover points that they would come into there. So we weren't terribly far from there. But anyway, so it was a pretty good prize. We captured a doctor and nurse, and we had to keep them with us. And I don't quite remember, but we had eventually, because you can't fly a helicopter when it's pouring down rain. You had no visibility, so you don't want to smash into a mountainside. So so I think we had to keep them with us for a day or so, until we finally got a resupply helicopter came in and picked him up and took him out, brought us rations, took him out, him and her.
So you mentioned some Viet Cong casualties. Were your fellow soldiers wounded when you were?
No, we were. The captain, I was there at a change of command, and captain that had been in charge of us made a comment, and he, like I said, I wasn't there maybe a month, and he was replaced by Captain White, but he said I feel really good. He says that we've been able to accomplish our mission, and he said no one in this company has lost their lives in the last 12 months that I've been here. So you get that's a pretty good and he was well liked. You could tell the people that they had, the GIs that were there had a lot of respect for him. And after that, then things changed, and we also got a change at the top at our we got a battalion commander change too. And when this guy came out to meet us in the field, it was like, wow, see, he's old. I'm 21, right? So, but anyway, but I looked, I said, man, this guy is old. And I thought, and he was in infantry. He was you can tell by on his lapel, he was an engineer. And I thought, we got a ticket puncher here. And that's what was hampered Vietnam, is that everybody, if you could operate or be command of an infantry platoon or an infantry company, whatever, for a 6-month period, your ticket to be promoted, that was kind of the you got punched, like, okay, yeah, check that off, or check the box off, So that pretty much, our missions got we're coming out, we're all screwed up. They were asking us to do things that we said, when we would say, all right, you give us the mission first, and then they're telling us how they wanted us to do it. And we actually, at one time, we told the lieutenant, so no, we're not going up there. And I said, they're like, it's all right. He said, well, we want you, get you online, and we want you to assault this hill. There's supposed to be dug in NVA at the top of this hill. There's no cover on this thing. So we said, well, we had already were thinking about, when they told us what we wanted to do, is, so we said, we'll take a squad and we'll go up the left side. That's approachable. The rest of us will be over here as a diversion, and let that squad go up and recon the hill to find out what's there. So here you're going to go. You're supposed to be going in. Intelligence tells us dug in positions there of the enemy, and it said, and they're telling us how we're going to go about. We're going to go frontal assault, go right up, like fixed bayonets, and walk up the hill. So we asked them. I said, can we have a couple of smoke rounds? Drop that, and a negative, and it was like, it's drop a couple of artillery rounds there with smoke, which would mask our assault on the hill. No, can't have that. But they're just telling us that's the way they want us. They don't want us to go up and recon it or find out So it was going against everything in our being and our experiences. That this is bullshit. This is you shouldn't be doing it. You don't dictate to us in the field. Tell us what the objective is, but don't dictate us how to go about it. So finally we simply said, sir, so we ain't going up there. And we told the lieutenant, and he got online. So what are you, and of course they berated him for being an officer to get your men moving, stuff like that. No, sir, I'm in. He says, and I agree with him. This is not the way to go about this. So you got somebody sitting in an office back, Chu Lai or wherever, and they're calling her at LZ Hawk Hill. They're telling us what we should do in the field. And I said, this is messed up. So hence part of my PTSD was the trouble with authority figures when I got back, because I can't handle stupidity. I just don't. When what you're doing, you're not thinking about what you're doing and about what the ramifications are, or what you're asking somebody to do.
Where I was headed with my question earlier, maybe this didn't happen to you, so maybe you'd have to answer this question in general, but if you're out in the field like that, and if you're walking 5, 6, 8 miles a day, you might be 30 miles away from the base, or I don't know. Somebody gets hit, you got to get them back to so a helicopter would come in, unless it's raining.
Yes. Yeah.
And if it's raining, you just got to take care of the guy until.
Yeah, medevac, call for medevac.
And if somebody's killed, the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't leave somebody behind, right?
No. I can answer that more directly toward the end of my tour of duty. We had I got blown up twice. Anyway, we had a 4:00 in the afternoon, and we get this order to come down. They want us to bivouac near or night logger near where the orphanage is. And we operate out in the boonies. In a way, I was grateful for that. We didn't go in a lot of villages. You'd see a couple of hooches here or there, you know. So they wanted, and we're looking. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to have to go on a trail, and we're going to have to hike our butts off to get there by nightfall, you know. And it was, I don't know, probably maybe 3 or 4 kilometers, and so we said, oh, you know, like, this is bull, you know. And so we knew in our progress of trying to get there in a hurry, and we had one of the guys, and I was standing. I can remember seeing this. One of the 2 guys in our squad, Rich Ochoa and Rick Hoopsch. Rich was from Los Angeles. Rick was from Phoenix, Arizona. Anyway, they were climbing up a fairly tall, like, countertop height stone wall where a rice paddy, you know, had been formed years ago, whatever. And then there, you know, you had elevations like that. So he climbed up on there, full ruck on, you know, his 85 pounds on his back. He crawls up to the top of the wall, and he turns around and he grabs a hold of Rich's hand to pull him up on that, and he backed up, and there was a tripwire there, and which is a good place to put it, you know, right there. And it backed up. He tripped that. It set off a mortar round. It was a 60 millimeter mortar round, blew, and it took both of Rick's legs, part of his arm, one testicle. I know that. Remember, that was mostly on our minds. We were worried about. The guy lived, but because we're all young and maybe one of the families and stuff, so, you know, having your credentials in order was very important to us, you know. So Rich was hitting the liver. He was hit bad, so we went down the hill. The leadership was on the side of the hill to go down farther, and we set up an LZ there, brought the medevac helicopter in to get him on board. And it was because we're in a pretty steep hill, the helicopter had to nose his skids in, and we had to kind of get him up on the deck, and we were in a poncho was what we had, each one, and that was a litter, improvised litter. We got him up on the deck of the helicopter, and all of a sudden, boom! I remember the last thing I remember seeing is the chin bubble of the medevac helicopter be pierced, and I saw the that would have been the co-pilot, I guess, and he reached down and he grabbed his leg, you know, and I blacked out and was picked up and thrown about 30 feet, and I came to, and I thought, oh man. And so there were people hit all around me, and miraculously I didn't know it until later, but I had light shrapnel all went through my uniform. It was like splinters. I had a whole body full of splinters, and by the time nightfall and the adrenaline rolled down, I was like going about half crazy with them pulling these things out. And so, but at that point in time, I thought we got to get, and the medevac, I heard the radio, whoever was on the RTO, the radio, and said, I can't come back. I've got leaking hydraulics. I got to get back. We'll dispatch another medevac out to you, and of course then here we are on the ground, and I yell, who's hit? And that was one of the things they taught us, is that the people that don't answer, that's where you want to go. So I know I saw one of our guys. It was I think he was one of the machine gunners. But anyway, I went up and I found him in it was tall grass, about as tall as the table there, 2 foot. And I went over and I found him, and he had a head wound. I checked him all over, trying to talk to him. His eyes are on, but he's not speaking. So, and I checked, and I said, oh man. I said, so I'm like, didn't want him necessarily moving. I said, you're gonna be all right, man. We're gonna get. So I called Doc, and our medic is universally named Doc. It doesn't matter who they are. Hey Doc, I got a head wound. So he came over. One of the other guys is hopping around on one leg. He took shrapnel on the inside of his thigh, and he said, "Oh," he said, "What about me? I'm hurt." I said, "Sit down and put a bandage on it," And it's like, then he realized, they said, "There's other people hurt worse than you." So he sat down, and that's exactly what he did. It got him back into focus. He just bandaged himself up, and he was it went through the fleshy part of the inside of his thigh. But he was hopping around like a kangaroo, kind of, sit down. But I learned something about myself there. Now, I'm still a PFC. I'm a private first class. The NCOs that we had, all the sergeants that we had, and we had an abundance of them in there. Everybody was kind of shell shocked, or they were just, they didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, we got to get an LZ for that next bird to come back. I don't want to think we want to trust anywhere up here. We went through that big rice paddy that we were trying to get out of, down a flat area. I believe the bird can get in there. So I said, Sergeant so-and-so, I said, take your squad or take a few minutes to go down and establish an LZ down there, set up a perimeter around that, So here I am as a PFC, and when there's chaos and everybody is like stunned, I started giving orders. And finally, I did get the other, we had a platoon sergeant, and then we had an E6, a sergeant first class anyway, but he finally got to me and he said, I'm going to need your help, he says, to get everybody focused. He said, go in here. And I said, all right, Sergeant, what do you want to do here? So he said, yeah, he said, you're right. Let's get everybody down there in a landing zone to be able to get the wounded out, extract. So, and then the part that was after that is, so we brought a helicopter in. It was clipping the trees on both sides with the rotor, but you set it down real nice like this, and we loaded the wounded up.
How long did it take from the time the first helicopter went back to the second one got there?
Probably, maybe shy of a half an hour.
Okay. All right.
And so Doc had stabilized everybody, and then the guys that were ambulatory, get those guys, get the wounded down to that LZ, So that was like I said, I'm telling people what to do, because it seemed to me very clear as what had to happen, And I had enough experience. I just didn't have the rank to tell anybody to do anything, So we got everybody down there, and he was good. He had to bring it straight up like this, and he had to then tip it to get it out of there. But so I think there were 9 wounded that day. I think we had. I believe that's correct. I had 9 wounded. So now we got to, what do? We got nightfall coming on, so we have to collect. You got to police up the area. You got all these rucksacks. Laying all over, and weapons laying here and there, and grenades, and so we had to go through and police the area up. When we gathered all the rucksacks, which going down to that rice paddy, and it was, like I said, it was surrounded by a jungle, and so we said that's where we're going to set our night logger position. And that was a long night. That was like I said, I felt the shrapnel, was just starting, and then once I'm pulling pieces out like this, that it had been hit, and probably had I said something, I probably should have got a second Purple Heart, but it's like a lot of bravados, like, don't mean nothing, didn't kill me, so I'm all right,
You said this was near the end of your tour?
Yeah, well, the end of the time I was there, not the end of my tour. I got my tour cut short so that was the major, and I had to wonder about that. Why I had people all around me that were hit, and I thought I had not been hit. I checked myself, and I'm like, but it was again, the adrenaline going. You didn't realize it. You realize you had minor shrapnel all over you, and so we got out of there, and then with the next day, then we had to go to where we were supposed to have been that day before. We got there, and we got a resupply. The sun came out. It was pretty good. We had a resupply there. Then we were given a mission to pull road guard for a road that ran from US 1 into, it originally I think went up to Hep Duck, but the road, we'd come in, the engineers could put a road in to go up to our fire base, so we could turn our fire base over to the South Vietnamese, the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So we could build a fire base. You could supply by truck. You wouldn't have to have just where we were at the time. It was the only thing you had by helicopter. So we pulled this road guard, and the lieutenant had interim here. The lieutenant had one of our radio operators went home, and he came up to me and he goes, "Congratulations, you're my new radio operator." And I was like, "It's 25 pounds you got to carry extra." And I humped heavy, as they call it. I always, because of knowing that you could maybe not be resupplied every fourth day, I carried extra ammo, I carried extra food, so I could stretch if it didn't look like we were going to get any resupply, I could stretch my rations out. And a lot of other guys didn't do that. They weren't willing to carry that extra weight. So I carried extra, and but anyway, I became his new radio operator at some point in time there, and Sparky, our radio operator, he was kind of a hippie from Indiana, and he had granny glasses on, and loved beads, and like a lot of us did, though, we had love beads on. We wore, so he had. The radio operator was actually pretty good duty. There were three of us, and we would have to do radio check at night. We weren't out on the pulling guard on the perimeter. We were in the CP was in the center. So wherever we have a night logger, we wouldn't dig in. We just find a spot and set up a perimeter. CP was in the platoon sergeant, lieutenant, would there, and then the three of us are radio operators. So we had to split the night up by, you sit with a hand set in your head like this, and you hear they would check in on the hour. They'd check in, to see how we were at back at the company, and when we knew our call sign, and they would say, brake squelch twice. So all we had to do, no voice transmission. We just, and they knew we were okay. Mm-hmm. And but in the process of that sort of thing, I had to stick a lot of times to the lieutenant, and I think there was something else that happened earlier on where there was a friendly fire incident, and it kind of kept him from getting in trouble. So I think that's why he wanted me to become his radio operator, because I'm thinking good advice. And so I was with him, and we were on this old Marine fighting position up on top of this hill, but you could see down the road. And he said, "Oh, you got perfect view from here." And I was like, hair stands back on my neck. I said, "Sir," I said, "we're on the side of a hill." I said, "In the accent, take the high ground." He said, "Yeah, well, it's an old Marine fighting," and that was the protocol. Don't go in. The Marines were notorious about leaving booby traps on their old sites where they were. They wouldn't clean up after themselves, so to speak. So you had to be careful about that. So, okay, I understand it. So we put out 2 observation posts, 2 men here above us, and we were there. We set the CP so we could watch. So we spent the day patrolling, and on one of the patrols, there was somebody who was sniping at him. Couldn't tell where it was coming from, and he said it sounded like it was coming from over near us where we were. And so we got ready to move into our night logger, and usually they went the last patrol of the day. They know what direction we wanted to go to, and they would search out a site for us to set up for night logger. And so we were rucking up to go to that position, and he called in those OPs, those guys that were up there in the observation posts. He brought them in, and as soon as he brought them in, I was on my M16 lean, and my peripheral vision, which is pretty good, and I saw an American-made hand grenade, a lemon, they called it, lemon grenade, an M24, I think. But anyway, but that was flying through the air, and I thought, and I yelled, "Frag!" Well, all I can remember is looking around, and it went boop, boop. It landed right at the lieutenant's feet, and he did and this is the thing they'll teach you in combat. If you panic, it'll kill you. And he did a run in place. He was doing that, and I had turned away, and it went off. The grenade went off. So I would meet you away from that hand grenade going off. So at the end, the length of this table, and when it blew, it raked my radio. I had made a partial turn and didn't get all the way turned. To turn and drop is what you're supposed to do, because the grenade blows up in a cone like this. It blows up. So if you're laying flat, even if you're close to it, the chances of you getting hurt are less if you're in a danger zone, but you're not in a direct kill zone. And so I dropped. It sliced open my thigh, my groin. I took a piece in the neck, piece in the liver. I took one big piece about the size of a thumbnail. Felt like went through my intestines and lodged over here. And the only thing I can say to people, how did it feel like to be wounded? It was intense heat, and it was like zip. That's all I can remember about it. Just an intense, quick pain as the shrapnel traveled through my intestines and then lodged over on the other side. The other thing is, when I kind of came to, I had a piece here in my arm, and that was a pretty good hole, and I hit an artery there, and it was pumping, my blood was pumping out, and I thought, seeing my own blood didn't really bother me that much. I thought, damn, where? And I just took my bandage on it, put direct compression on the thing, and I had to hold it with my teeth and tied it off and stuff. So I had to stop the bleeding. So I checked otherwise, and it was interesting because there's a firefight going on with now the guys that are ambulatory are firing back up the hill, and I remember there's a ring in my ears. All it was is, and you couldn't hear anything else. If you ever get the chance to see the Megan Levy, the movie Megan Levy, anyway, she gets blown up over in Iraq, and that is about as close to getting blown up as I can actually attest to it. That's a lot like it, as Hollywood can do.
So this ringing in your ears from your injury from the...
It just blew. I mean, I had a tremendous explosion go off.
Gotcha.
6 feet away from me.
Gotcha.
It may have helped us because when the blast went off, it set off. He had 2 red smoke grenades on his web gear, and it set those off. So we had this huge. Imagine being at a rave or something with a huge amount of plume of red, around you that you couldn't see. So actually, it probably masked the enemy's ability to be able to hit us. And we believe it was just one man that did this. Was the typical throw a frag, empty 30 rounds, spray to hose the area down. I remember laying behind a rock and seeing the rounds kick up dust right near me. And I reached up and grabbed my M16. I pulled it over, and it was the barrel. The receiver and the buttstock was gone. It had blown it in half or blown it to bits. So it didn't make anything. So I'm looking around trying to find a weapon to fight back, and I couldn't at the time, so there was nothing there. And then immediately your body goes through the thing of your intestines being hit. So I just vomited. I just puked everything I had. As a defense mechanism, the body wants to empty out whatever in your digestive system. So I don't want that stuff in here now. I can't process it. So. So my radio was trash. I went over, and the first thing I thought of, I said, well, the first, let's fight back. I didn't have a weapon. I grabbed a weapon that was laying on the ground. I went over to the other radio operator was there. And I don't know why our chief RTO was not there, the head RTO. He might have been on leave or whatever. But anyway, the other red-haired fellow from Indiana, and anyway, he's like panic-stricken. He's babbling. He's, and I thought, well, I'm like, calm down. I said, calm down. We got to get, and he goes, we got to get a medevac in here. I said, yes. I said, calm down. Let's talk him in. So he was already had made contact. His radio was working. He made contact with the fire base, and they were dispatching a medevac out. And they said, is the enemy still a threat? And he said, well, at the top of the hill, we don't know, but so they sent a gunship out with the medevac bird, and they said, we got to get everybody down off that hill and down into the rice paddy where we could set the bird down. And I went and looked for my buddy Joe. Should back up, because this guy should have had a medal for what he did. He and I didn't really, we chafed each other a little bit, I guess, during some things that happened, but in the field. But I have to admit, he was having a hard time. He started to calm down a little bit, so he started giving concise, direct, information to the fire base. And he goes, "Wait one," and he goes, and he's spitting like this, and these chunks of white are flying out, and I'm real. That's a tooth, So I'm looking at him from this side. He looks okay. So finally, then I turn around and look at him, and here he's got a hole about as big as a silver dollar. You could see his jaw in here operating, and minus his teeth. The shrapnel had blown part of his jaw out. So he was sitting there. He managed to get control of his emotions a little bit, and then he was able to handle it. And when he handled that, then I could move off and around checking the first aid for others that were there.
So you're walking around, but you've got a piece of shrapnel in your belly.
Yeah. I wasn't bleeding internally, luckily, I think, because it was so close to the grenade that the shrapnel was so hot that it seared itself, it cauterized as it went through. So I really wasn't, and again, when your adrenaline's flowing, your sense of pain, I always have a pretty good sense of pain, a threshold of pain, I believe, and I still do. So anyway, I went around and checked with my buddy Joe. He's blown out 40% of his liver's blown out. So I get him. I said, we got to get you down off this hill. So I have my M16 as a crutch, or the one that I picked up. Joe was there, and he says, my boonie hat, the military issue boonie hat, they were so hard to come by in the field. Everybody in the rear had them, but there's a certain disparity there. The REMPs, I don't know if you ever heard that term, rear echelon mother, because they got stuff, and they were supposed to come to us in the field. We never got it. So anyway, he would have waited so long to get this boonie hat, and I had one. It was made by a tailor shop down in the rear when we were. Mine was not even a GI issue. But anyway, I got his. I went and grabbed it, picked his boonie hat up, stuffed it inside his shirt, and I got him down off of the hill. I set him there. Went up and got a couple more guys, brought him down, and then somebody was saying, somebody's got to bring this helicopter in. Well, now we know there was some sniper fire stuff, so now I got to do it. I went out there and used my M16. I brought, you say, this is where I want you to come in to me. So he set it down, and he just hovered. He set the skids on the dike, on the paddy dike in the middle of this area, and I didn't realize that you can't set the helicopter down. And because if you get it stuck in the mud, there's a torque turnover that I think I learned afterward. But when you pull pitch to want to bring it up, it'll do this. So he was hovering with it on, and I thought, why is he hovering with this thing on? So anyway, we managed to get the guys in there, got everybody on board. We were all loaded up, and we so he pulled pitch and got out of there. And the onboard medic said to me, he'd get real close because of the noise. He said, "Can you do heart massage?" He said, "Yes." And he had Angel Delgado was laying on the deck, and he was pretty pale. He had a lot of light shrapnel in him, and he'd bend over clearing the airway, and I was doing the chest compressions on him, and we worked on him for about half the time. So probably for 10 minutes, 12 minutes maybe, we worked on him and trying to keep him alive. And I know that when he was having trouble clearing the airway, when he turned his head sideways and he swept his mouth out and stuff, man, there were bits of flesh and stuff that were coming up. So I know internally he had been pretty well ripped up. And he sat back on his haunches and he looked at me and just waved me off. That's enough. So we got back to the aid station at LZ Hawk Hill, and they were pulling everybody off of there and stuff. I made something really stupid. I jumped off the deck of the Bird, again about as high as the table, and I jumped down, and when I landed I went, oh damn, that hurt. So I think immediately what I had started to do was starting to internally bleed then. And I went in, and everybody had looked at the medic, even my own medic looked at it and said, oh, that's a flesh wound, because it wasn't really bleeding, but it was over here, all the way here at my side. And I was like, no, I tried to, well, they did a triage in a little room there outside the, this is like, if you go back to MASH, like the, if you can relate to that, the TV series, they did a triage, and the first the medic looked at me, he goes, oh, he says, you got a flesh wound. I was like, no, I was trying to get his attention. So I sat down, he disappeared. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden the pain is starting to come in, and I'm like, oh man, this is starting to hurt now. And the guy next to me was lightly wounded. He wasn't even one of our guys that was in it, but he's in. And he said, what's the matter? And I said, I got hit, and I said, I took that shrapnel one across this. I think I'm bleeding internally. And so he was my advocate, if you will, somebody I didn't know. And he said, hey, medic, he said, come over here. He said, it's a flesh wound. I said, no, it's not. I said, it went across. I said, I believe I'm bleeding internally. So he went, this is a little bit more like MASH, so he went to go get the doctor. Doctor comes out, he's got the apron all full of blood and stuff, and got the white top cover, and he goes, does this hurt? And he pressed me right below the breastbone, and I went, I literally, like a noodle, I slid right onto the floor. It hurt so bad. And he goes, we got a man with a hot belly. He says, get him in here. So they get me in, and the helicopter was outside. The medevac going there was winding up, and they cut my clothing all off of me, bandaged me what they could, and what they get, the visible wounds. Threw me on a stretcher in there, and I became about another 20-minute or so, half an hour ride down to Chulai to the 91st Evac Hospital. And during that flight, I thought, oh, I'm going to vomit again. Oh, and I know how helicopter guys are. They don't like to have to clean the bird up. So I'm like trying to, the medic somewhere, no, I said, and they go, okay. So he had a hold of my got a hold of me somehow. I don't remember exactly right, but I inched my way over the edge of the stretcher, and I stuck my head over the deck of the Bird, so I was vomiting out into the air. And but I know that they really don't like you to throw up in their helicopters. So at 91st Evac, they got me in, and I told this story for over at the hospital over here in the medical center, and they were all in for Veterans Day, but they were interested about the timeline. And I said, I know it was 20 minutes after 5 that we were hit, because my Seiko watch, the bezel was scratched all up, and the shock, it had a tuning fork in it, and the shock had stopped the watch at 20 minutes after 5. By 7:45, I had been to an aid station. I was now in the hospital waiting to go into the operating room at 7:45. So I know my timeline was I was cognizant. And he says, you're gonna have to wait a little bit, because he said you got some of your brothers, he said, are hurt a lot worse than what you are. And I'm thinking, damn, they got to be really hurt bad, because I'm hurt pretty good. Well, I guess that wasn't not exactly, because it said the guy in it said, well, he said you got yourself that $1 million wound. And I thought, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, the war's over for you. You're done. You're going home. And I'm thinking, you're not going to patch me up and send me back out to my unit. So I was conflicted feelings at that point. I felt really good that I was going to go home, the possibility of going home. But the other thing is, I felt very bad because I left my fellow comrades in arms out in the field.
What month were you in? Was this your third month there? 6 month, 9
No,
month?
I was there for a total of 4.5 months. So I went in the first week of November, and I was wounded on the 22nd of February. My birthday was on the 11th, and then I was wounded after. So I was 21 years old. I was wounded, and I stayed another. They said you're too unstable. You had to heal before they could even transport you. You got to stay here, and then, so the recovery was in the hospital. I was there, and I didn't leave, I think, until middle of March, I think it was. So almost a month I was in the hospital there, and then they sent me up to Da Nang, and at Da Nang I was in an Air Force aid station that was there, and with a bunch of Marines. And it was interesting because those guys were all wounded. They're all talking about how they got hurt, and they go there, and he said, "How'd you get hurt?" And I said, "Grenade." I said I was the only combat wounded one in the whole aid station. There was a whole bunch of Marines, but nobody was combat wounded. They laughed a little bit, and then I caught a C-141 Starlifter that took us out to Guam, I believe, and they had to hot refuel, which did not make me feel real happy. I was there were 3-tiered bunks in there in the tail of the aircraft, and I was in the top, and they had the doors open and stuff. But normally, when you refuel an aircraft, everybody exits the aircraft because of fire. If you fire, you're gonna. So I was a little antsy about that, but they finally refueled, and then we went on to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and there I spent 2 weeks there, and that's the first time I was able to actually make a phone call to home. And I got hold of my mother, and here I'm thinking that she knew about me being wounded, because he said, "Do you want, if you're lightly wounded or walking wounded, do you want us to notify your parents or your wife at home and stuff?" And I said, "No, I don't want. If I'm lightly wounded, that's it. I'm severely wounded enough to be medevaced." And they never let anybody know. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that's not quite right either. So I talked to my mother, and all she could do was she just sobbed and, "Mom, I'm okay. Got all my appendages are in order. I got gut shot." I said, it was terrible, but anyway. So you had a limited amount. You could talk back to the United States with limited possibilities then. So nobody knew I was wounded.
I have 2 quick questions for you. We're sort of at the end of your Vietnam experience, so before we leave Vietnam, the first question is, so you leave those guys and you never see them again, right?
Right.
To this day, have you ever seen them again?
Yes, I met the one guy who was a grenadier. My buddy Joe has been really better at working the internet to be able to find. I've tried to find John Collison. I know that Joe found. We found Joe. Peter Uribe ended up staying. He became a lifer. He made it a career. Richard Choa was killed in a shootout with a SWAT team in Los Angeles. He talked to his dad. Actually, Joe managed to get a hold of his dad. He said, "I'm looking for the father of Richard Choa," and he said, "Yeah, that's it." He said, he served in Vietnam?" "Yeah." And he said, "No." He said he was killed in a shootout with a SWAT team. So I've actually had very few guys that I've been able to make contact with, even with the help of the internet. Joe's been a little bit better. He talked to Rick Hoopsch, the guy that lost both legs and an arm. He managed to contact him.
This is very different than World War II and previous generations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would have my wounds in World War II. I would only had a 50-50 chance of surviving a gut shot. Civil War would have been a death sentence. And in Vietnam, I had a 90% chance that I was going to survive.
The other question is, I graduated from high school in '71, so I was watching the news. I was aware of what was going on. I remember distinctly seeing a news story about marijuana use among soldiers in Vietnam, and I thought to myself, "That's crazy. How could soldiers dull their senses like that?" But did you run across that at all?
It was, well, you had juicers and smokers, and that was the escape measure. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's alcohol or marijuana. The problem was, it was easier to buy heroin than it was to buy marijuana. It was crazy. I couldn't get over that. I thought, man, that's just incredible. But nobody did that though. Why we had a new guy came into our platoon, and he had joined us, and it was a big mission. We were on a company size ambush, and it was a big mission. We were sleeping during the day, whatever, and we went over there, and Sergeant Collison was, he knew I was squared away. He said, bring your M16. He said, back me up. Didn't say what it was. We went over to this individual, and he was there. He says, give me your dope. And he said, oh man, he kind of gave him a rough time, and he said, no. He said, hey, what you do in the rear area is your business. He said, you come out here and you're in a field. He said, you stay straight. He said, give me your dope. You'll get it back when you go back to the rear area. And of course he cussed him out a little bit and stuff, but he did give it up. He gave it to him. No, I'm going to hold it for you until we get back in the rear. So we're in the field. There was no, I can't say we had drug use in the field. Right. We were a pretty tight unit. We were pretty strack, as they said, So, but it was a problem. There's no doubt about it. And like I said, you could see on guys that would, like I said, when you would find heroin easier than you would pot to be able to smoke or make a joint or smoke a joint,
Well, fascinating stories, and we could probably talk about this even longer, but let's talk about what happened after. How did Vietnam affect your life afterward?
Well, I kind of, as far as, I had observed and was part of some traumatic events, and so I ended up there was no treatment for it back then. I was supposed to go, even for my wounds. I was 30% disabled, and they said I was supposed to be reevaluated. I went up to the VA hospital up in Wilkes-Barre, and I looked at so many guys that were so much worse off than I am, and I said, I'm grateful I lived. So I turned away, and I never used the VA system until about 12 years ago. So I walked away from it. I said, no. I said, I'm grateful that I lived, and so I turned away from any of those VA benefits that I was eligible for. It affected me. Like I said, I don't have any real tolerance for stupidity or for when people do dumb stuff. And I worked in industry. I did actually I had a 28-year career as I worked my way up through the ranks in the maintenance department at Hop and LaRoche. I raised a son. I was married 3 times. The third time's the charm. But I ended up, where do I want to go with this? It gave you a different sense of perspective of the world. I knew when I came back I was different than all my friends. My high school friends we were on different planes at that point. It did affect me, PTSD. It took a while to acknowledge it. I didn't realize maybe how bad I actually was, because most of the time back then, the only thing you did was, my good friend who was president of our chapter, Patrick Conway, you may know. Anyway, we would go out in the backyard, and we'd sit around and we'd have a few beers and on the campfire, and we would talk about our experiences and shed some tears, and we knew we weren't going to be judged by the people around us. And that's the big thing everybody is worried is I can't be forgiven for what I've done or what I've had to do. You know, I'm not redeemable, and a lot of vets have that perspective. I felt because I was raised I went to Hamilton Square, I went to church, I was raised in a church, so I was raised Christian. So it was the point where I asked, you know, God and Jesus to forgive me for what I've done and what I had to do, and I know that I was going to be forgiven. So I think that helped my mental frame of mind more than a strong religious belief anyway, or spiritual belief.
So you had the feeling that you needed to be forgiven? I mean, you did something that you felt.
Well, whenever you take a life, you know, I mean, here you are. There's where the clash comes in. Is if you're raised in a church environment or a Christian environment, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not. Okay, you can kill now. It's like that, and even that over there, we did with. And I think that was we all a collective thing. We did it with reservation. Let's put that. We were not bloodthirsty. We didn't go after. We'd rather try to capture you, but if you didn't want to be captured, you know, okay, so be it. It's on you. Had to do a lot of what was, you know, it said you got to get your head in the game because it said the killer be killed too. So that's part of that. Okay, you're trying to kill me. I'm gonna do my best to keep you from killing me, you know. If that means trading your life for mine, so be it. But there's evil in the world, and I've come to that. That's helped me to reconcile some of the things that there is evil in the world, and there are just some people that have to be tough, that have to, you know, to take care of that evil when it presents itself. And but he did have just my rest of my life as a 28-year career with Hop on the Roche. They were supposed to have veteran preference. I couldn't get a job there. I took my applications down twice, and it was an up and coming pharmaceutical company just across the river. And I finally, my buddy, who a long-term friend, God rest his soul, he's dead now, but his father-in-law says, "Give me an application," and he said, "I'll turn it in." He says, "I'll get you a job." He said, "I'm surprised that they didn't call you for an interview." So anyway, he took it into his boss. We bypassed the HR department because Vietnam vet, the crazed Vietnam vet, was a real thing then, you know. And when people would push your buttons, and there's another story. My first day in civilian life is another story behind that as well. And we ended up, I took it to him. His boss called me in. He said, "I'll hire you," but he said, "I won't have you very long." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" And he says, "No." He said, "Once," he said, the maintenance department gets a look at your resume, he said, "they're going to snatch you right up." So I said, "Well, I'm going to be a custodian." That's what the job had. And I said, "I'll be the very best custodian I possibly can for you." And so for 3 months, I was swinging a mop and cleaning commodes. And I was already a registered Ford technician at this point. So it was humbling to be able to step down to that, you know. Didn't have mechanical skills. So I bid on a job which I was not qualified for, but at least I got in front of the people that could make those decisions. And they must have liked what they saw, because they actually created a position as a maintenance mechanic trainee for me. So it was a non-union shop, and they said, "Hey, we're going to take this guy on." So I worked my way up through a trainee, maintenance mechanic, machinist millwright, senior machinist millwright. I went into a maintenance planner, went into a maintenance supervisor, went to an operations supervisor, where I was in charge of the whole building, and 35 people, direct or indirect, 35 people, one man as leadership. They were consolidating, we went through a re-engineering, and so that was very much, I learned that. It was handle it just like you would in the military, like squads and a platoon and squads. You had a shift, and you had squads that worked here, squad that worked here, you know. And so I operated just like the military, and did pretty well with that. And then finally, I ended up being a process support specialist for reliability. So that's that, and that was a sweet job. It really was. It was you'd just be able to make sure what we were working on, process improvements, were the right process improvements, and seeing those projects come to fruition, so be able to reduce downtime and uptime, increase uptime.
One of the questions I was going to ask you, and I think you maybe alluded to it when you said your first day back. Did you run into people calling you baby killers and that kind of stuff?
No, but it's funny now, and I like to be able to, you have to be able to laugh at yourself. It was funny, but I down on Main Street here, Lower Main Street, down by where the Warrior Bar and Grill is there was that was where the unemployment office was down there. Vargas Furs right there next to it. So I went in there. I arrived home from release from active duty, and they told us you go to apply for unemployment. I didn't have a place to live, you know. I'll get ahead of myself a little. So I went in there, and I'd never applied for our unemployment before, and I end up there's a long line, and I just got in the line and went up to the gal and said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I'm applying for unemployment." We're gonna have to go over that little kiosk over there and fill out form and then get back in this line. There was like 35 people in line. So I went over there, I filled out the form, I got back in line, I came up through, and she looked it over and she said, "Go down to clerk number 4. I can tell you it was number 4. It was closest to the window, to the sidewalk on Main Street. I went down there to her, and she said, "Well, what are you here for?" And I said, "I'm here applying for unemployment." And she says, "We don't just give out unemployment." And it stunned me, and I'm like, I looked around the room, and there's 40 people in this room, you know. And I said, "Ma'am, I don't intend on being on it very long." I said, "I just got released." I said, "Friday, I got released from active duty in Fort Hood, Texas. We drove straight through with a friend of mine that had been met in basic. We drove straight through. I don't have a place to live. I don't have, all my stuff is being shipped home from Texas, and they said it'll be a minimum of 2 weeks." And I said, "I was told I'm eligible for it when I left the Army," and I said, "That's why I'm here to apply. I don't intend to be back. In fact, when I leave here, I'm going to go back where I was working to try to get my job back." And she said, "Well, you're going to have to go on interviews." And I said, I'm going to apply for my job. Did you know, like, so I'm coming to this point. I'm dealing with a low-level bureaucrat here, right? So she says, "Well, we have to find out if you have some transferable skills." She said, "What did you do in the Army? And so what was your job?" And I said, "I was in the infantry." And she said, "What were your daily, I don't know what that means. Well, could you tell me what your daily operations were, what you did on a daily basis?" And I said, and I swear, and I'll say this because of you dumb bitch, I was thinking to myself, I said, "Lady," I kind of leaned forward. I said, "Lady, I walked around ass deep in the rice paddies," I said, "with an M16 rifle, and I tried to kill the enemy. So I said, unless you got a goddamn job as a hitman in the mafia, give me my goddamn unemployment." Well, the color drained from her face. She signed the papers and slid them across to me, and it was like keeping her distance. I got up, and at that point, she had pushed the buttons to trigger the crazed Vietnam bet, which we had a reputation for, but it was because people push our buttons. So I carried my paperwork to go get in that other line, back into that line. And it was like the Red Sea. That line is still, it seemed like it never went down. Like 20-some people, or whatever. They just backed up and let me walk right up to the front and handed my paperwork in. And I walked outside, and I can still go out. It still triggers me when I go down there. I go have an adult beverage or two down at the Warrior, and I'll park down there. And I stood outside that, and I sat there, and I quaked, literally, like this. And I said, "What did I ever do to deserve this kind of treatment?" I said, "All I ever did was what my country asked me to do. And I was asked to do it, and I did my duty. Why am I being treated like this?" And it was just, that was pretty traumatic. I sat there, and you would swear to God I had palsy, I think, because I was a mess. I stood there. So anyway, but it's funny to laugh at it now. But it was, at the time, it wasn't. But I couldn't believe that kind of treatment that we get. You know, there was no welcome home, nothing. My community in the West End did welcome me home. I had people that were, "I'm glad you're home. I'm glad you survived." You know, the people were. So my community welcomed me. So that, and like I said, and it was I had I had the nightmares, and pulling my first wife. I pulled her out of bed one night, I grabbed her across her shoulder like this, and I drug her off into bed to the side of the bed to get in a depressed position because it was like small arms fire, and she slapped me and woke me up. Like, I'm sorry, I said, I just was worried for our lives, so we went through that, and like I said, we talked some of it out. There was no. That's why today I've been a veteran advocate for a number of years. That's why I work with Valor Clinic Foundation, with their Veterans Ensemble program, because there was nothing like that for us. And so I have. As my son said, when I was debating whether to engage in helping that program out, and my son said something. He said, "Dad, you can offer something to these young vets that nobody else can." And he said, "That's hope," because he said you raised a family, you had a successful career, in the industry, and he said, and you wrestled your demons. So that's why I'm still in there helping, where I can.
You in your talk, excuse me, today, you've been alluding to things that you took away from the Army, a way to, I don't know how to say this, a way to organize your life, a way to be, a way to respect other people. Do you feel that way about the Army?
Well, once you're forever changed. If you're a a supply clerk, or you're in the infantry, whatever, once you're in the military, you're changed forever. You don't look at the world the same way that a civilian does, and that creates a lot of conflict with civilians, because they don't, in the military, if you don't do your job right, or you don't perform your task to standard, somebody dies. And so we take what we do much more seriously than a lot of civilians, and that sets up, we've had vets that have had difficulty like that doing a job, and they're a trauma nurse and she couldn't get a job. She got fired from 2 different hospitals. She couldn't, you're too militaristic. You're too much of a bitch, and she says, I demand the best from myself, and I demand the best from the people around me. If you're sloughing off or whatever, I'm going to call you on it. And a lot of civilian, and even supervisors get a little, when you're calling the supervisor, when that guy or gal is screwing up, and you're calling them on it. And so that sets up civilian military conflict. And so we are different, and we are still, when it comes out, we're like sheepdogs.
How do you mean that?
Well, there's an interesting article was written on this, but the sheep are afraid of the wolf, the predator that's going to prey on, or sociopath that's going to prey. They're afraid of the wolf. The sheepdog, his whole existence exists to protect those sheep, those who don't have that will or ability to protect themselves. So when you're a sheepdog, and the sheep are a little afraid of the sheepdog, because the sheepdog has fangs, and the sheepdog can be capable of great violence when necessary. But the sheep, or the civilian world, doesn't understand that, and they don't know that it's something that you have to take action on. You can't stand by and idly let something occur without trying to affect a better outcome. So, but the sheep are afraid of the sheepdog as well as the whatchamacallit. So it's a kind of lonely existence you have to do. You have to perform.
What I'm hearing is it's kind of lonely, but you also have this camaraderie with the military.
Yeah. There's and that's why it naturally clicks whenever you get veterans together, and people yearn for that. That they yearn for that camaraderie, and like I said, that camaraderie is the only thing that kind of help make some sense of things around a campfire, whether they're having a beer around a campfire. That camaraderie is all important, and we joke around and bust each other about the different service rivalries and stuff, but we really, and no matter who you serve with, we have that.
That would be a great place to end this interview because it's such a positive message. But before we end, I always ask the question, is there something I should have asked you about, Glenn? Was there something you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
One one of the, and I get, maybe this could have been brought back, but pop culture in Vietnam. I talked a little bit about the political correctness, but pop culture. We used to have smoke grenades were different colors, but we would call for a medevac or a supply ship coming in. We had to identify the landing zone. So we would, because the enemy had a battlefield, like I described, a chaotic situation where they got radios. So the enemy had our radios, and they had the frequencies. And so what we would do is they used to ambush helicopters coming in. When they say, popping yellow smoke, on the ground, us as a ground unit would pop yellow smoke. Well, they may be hearing this on the radio. They'll throw a yellow smoke grenade out in order to lure in a helicopter into the wrong LZ and then shoot it up. And so we actually started using the flavor of Kool-Aid. So it would be, I said, it popping smoke. So they'd say, Roger, I copy, it's Goofy Grape or Loudmouth Lime, and it was a Choo Choo Cherry. The Kool-Aid flavors. We would identify the color of the smoke, and that and after that they like using only pop culture and understanding American experience when a pilot and a guy on the ground popping smoke could identify that. And so that was one of those little things that used to be always humorous to me, and it's one of those things that are often left behind because of But I thought it was a very humorous thing, how we had to defeat the enemy's ability to ambush us. Instead of calling colors out, we call out the Kool-Aid flavor.
Interesting stuff. It seems to me that we could go on for a long time yet, but I'm thinking we should probably call an end to this. I want to thank you very much. That was great, Glenn. Thank you.
Okay, and thanks to the Historical Association for putting this together. It's something that we wanted to be able to, keep track of for future generations.
Sure.
What it was like.
Sure. Okay. Well, with that, we'll end. Thank you.
Yeah.